Welcome to Wandering Jews at J Squared Adventures. Travel far enough and you meet yourself.
We're your hosts. I'm Scott.
I'm Sorel. Today, I am here with Rivka Brahma, Director of Content at J Squared. Rivka is kindly stepping in for us while Scott is in Spain, actually, currently leading one of J Squared's groups. So thank you for being here, Rivka.
Thanks for having me. It's exciting to be on this side of the microphone.
Amazing to have you. And today, we are talking about wine.
Let's whine about wine, Sorel.
Sorel Weinstein.
Sorel Weinstein. Exactly.
So we know that wine in Judaism is not just a drink, right? It's a ritual. It's a symbol. And essentially, it's a story poured into every glass. From the vineyards of ancient Israel to today's award-winning boutique wineries, wine has played a sacred and celebratory role in Jewish life for millennia. But how did we go from kiddush wine to world-class vintages? And what makes Israeli wine so special? So today, that's what we're going to be doing. We're going to be grabbing a glass as we explore the past, present, and future of Jewish wine culture. Rivka, where did it all start?
It's a great question, but I think we need to do this before we answer that question. I don't know if you guys can hear us, but we're pouring wine into a glass.
Thank you.
Because to talk about wine without having wine is a little bit strange. But let's go back to biblical times. Let's talk about the fact that Geffen, which is vineyards, is mentioned in the Bible. L'chaim, mentioned in the Bible numerous times. And our country is filled with vineyards and wine. And there's evidence for that all over the place. When we walk around Israel, you might have stumbled upon an ancient gat. Gat is the Hebrew word of wine press. Wine presses are all over the country. Mostly you would find them in the Bet Guvrin area, Bet Shemesh area, also up north. But it was very clear evidence that it was a wine industry from way, way, way back. Some of the reason we know people drink wine so much is because probably the water wasn't drinkable.
Interesting.
And that's why wine is mentioned so much, but it's definitely also a ritual thing that I think we'll talk about it later. But a gat, an ancient wine press, is basically the old place of manufacturing wine, which is a cemented area in the rock where you poured all your grapes and you stumbled and stomped on the grapes until it became wine. So you walk around Israel and you find ancient gatot in numerous places, which is always fun. And some places also try to recreate that experience. You know, in Israel, sometimes when you go in a school trip, when you're a kid, you take out a few grapes and you stomp around it and you kind of make awful tasting grape juice or wine.
You were raised here, right?
Right. So that's your first interaction with that. Exactly. But to call it wine would be stretching it.
A bit of a stretch.
But it's a fun experience.
You weren't coming home from your school trip with wine.
But as you're traveling along Israel, you would find ancient gatot almost everywhere.
And we see wine mentioned from biblical times.
We see wine mentioned from biblical times. We know that it's a 5,000-year thing going on. Obviously, throughout the ages, it changed, it differed. We're going to talk about it. There was also a Muslim ruling for a whole chunk of time in Israel, which basically alcohol and wine are very much clearly not part of that culture or even opposed to that culture.
And we know from the times of before the temple was destroyed that wine also played a really important role. It was used, when there were sacrifices, right? There wouldn't be a korban, a sacrifice, without being accompanied by wine. And the Leviim, right, the tribe of Leviim, they would sing songs while the wine was poured on the altar, on the Mizbeach. So we see that presence of wine all the way up until, and then when the temple was destroyed, that's when that kind of
disconnect happened. Exactly. So for a very, very long time, there wasn't really a wine culture. Even though wine was used ritually, it wasn't about the quality of the wine. It was usually about, we do kiddush, we do havdalah. What else do we do with wine?
We drink wine on Purim, the holidays. We have our 4 cups of wine. It's very much worked into everyday Jewish ritual life.
Nachon. Right. So it's clear that, we have to have wine in order to do Jewish things. Nobody talks about what wine. And we know that while we're in exile, we assume that different cultures use the wine that they had around them. If you happen to be in a place that there's good wines, you probably used good wines. We don't know. And if you happen to be in a place that wine wasn't part of the culture, then maybe you used to make the wine yourself or drink grape juice. But there wasn't really a lot of Jews who were manufacturing wine outside of Israel. Although I didn't research it, there might be some. I'm happy to hear from you guys if you found them.
I mean, the goal of wine, like from a Jewish ritual perspective, was to elevate and to sanctify the experience. And that's
Exactly.
like, even if we were just to look at a few of the examples that we gave of when Jews typically drink wine. So kiddush, right? Friday night. So when we're making kiddush, the purpose of kiddush is to... It's interesting, actually. The word kiddushin means also to separate, right? So it's also like we're talking about the days of creation, and that kiddush is like celebrating creation.
It's celebrating creation. It's making a differentiation between something. It's transcending something from the mundane, basically. That's when you use wine. And in a lot of cultures, wine is used as a ceremonial piece. That's why there's a big issue in Jewish law about drinking wine which isn't kosher or wine that is made by other people, because it was used for other rituals. We know that in ancient Greek, the god Dionysus basically is the god of wine, but he's also the god of letting things loose. And under his reign, things go a little bit crazy. So celebrating Dionysus is a little bit like our Purim, basically.
Where we kind of let
go. It's a carnival.
There's this concept of ad lo yada, like drink to the point ad lo yada until you are not in a place of consciousness and awareness.
You do not know the difference between evil Haman and good Mordechai. That's basically what you're supposed to know, but you still need to know who Mordechai is and who Haman is. So there's always a thing about, yes, we are aware that wine is part of our culture. We are aware that you need to sometimes set loose, but there's always rules for it.
It's always within the structure.
Exactly.
And you can see that mentioned, like even Maimonides, or it's mentioned in Proverbs, like warning against excessiveness, right? And I think that's always like being, when we're talking about
Shvita Zahav being the
exactly middle. Like it's really this idea of in its time, in its place, that within the context of Kiddush, wine has its place. Within the context of, you're talking about Kiddush separating, so Havdalah is separating from Shabbat as we usher in a new week. So we kind of see like wine throughout the ages as being very ritualistic and not something as part of our everyday culture mentality.
Right. It is related to ritual versus as a sign of good life or culture, although there's a rich culture of Middle Ages poetry, especially by Ibn Gvirol, written about wine. Obviously, that was part of the culture where he lived in, and there's whole books and whole poetries.
Did you ever read any?
So as a high school kid going to Israel, you had to learn a little bit of Ibn Gvirol and Yehuda Levi and all those very, very hard Middle Ages poems.
Yeah.
So you would read one or two
Wow.
poems about wine, which is a little bit strange for a teenager. But that was the choice.
Normalizing it.
Right, exactly. It's part of the canon. It's part of who we are.
Yeah.
And also sometimes the teacher would be, no, it's not really about wine. It's a metaphor. But you're like, really? Is it?
Can we just call a spade a spade?
Exactly. Check it out. Even Gabirol, wine songs.
That's awesome. Okay, so if we trace it back, though, and we look at, let's say, the destruction of the Second Temple, of the time that wine kind of weaned out, right? So when was there really a revival after that?
So actually, we know that there were ancient gatot.
The wine presses,
Wine presses. And then there's basically nothing. And at the 1900s, we see that there's a revival of the wine industry in Israel. And the person who took the most important role in this is obviously the Baron Rothschild, who is a French rich Jew who wants to help agriculture in Israel. I don't know if he called himself a Zionist, but he's definitely understanding the importance of self-sufficiency of the people living in Israel. And what is the way to do that is to grow vineyards and create wineries. So he created two important centers in Israel, one in Zichron Yaakov, where later on he was married, in one in Rishon LeZion. It's still called, when you look at their tagline, it's called Ir HaYain, the city of wine. Although I don't think there is actually a working winery there. Maybe it is.
I don't know. I kind of feel it should be the city of IKEA at this point.
It's true. But Rishon is like a very Israeli city, like
Yes.
really Israeli.
Yes.
But wine industry started to grow and vineyards were starting to be here. The quality of the wine, we're not 100% sure that, you and I would enjoy it, but it was a beginning, it was a start.
Was wine central to Rothschild's vision of being self-sufficient?
Yes, it's also what he knew. He
Right.
sent experts from France to help the poor Jewish people who came from Romania to help grow vineyards. And it's a long, long process of learning how to make wine, because we will use a French word, terroir, which is basically the land where your grapes grow from, is an important thing. And each terroir has its separate qualities, and that's how you make wine. It really, really takes a long time to learn what works, what doesn't work. So it took a long time.
So he started in Rishon
He started in Rishon and in Zichron.
and in Zichron.
And up until today, Kalman Mizrahi, which is the first winery, is still there. That's the biggest winery in Israel. Very commercial wine. Some of them, they have some different series who are more expensive, some less. But basically, most of the wines that we grew up here in Israel is up until through the 90s.
So you talk about the terroir, right? Like the climate, the environment in which it can prosper. Like if we're looking at, let's say, the north of Israel, that would be where ideally from a climate perspective, that's where there would be
So originally,
natural
most of it
development.
was like Carmel and up north. That's where most of the wineries are. In the 90s and 2000, the state of Israel poured a lot of money, like Baron Rothschild, thinking, okay, let's encourage and develop the communities living in the Golan and encourage people in the Golan to grow vineyards and to make...
in the 1990s.
Yes, in the 1990s. Much, much later. And that became a huge success. Basically, a lot of people attribute to the Golan winery the start of the wine revolution in Israel, basically, where good wine has started to be here.
Because, if I'm dating myself a little bit, so when I would make a trip to Israel as a child from England, I don't believe that my parents were hopping from winery to winery. Whereas I know from J Squared, as being somebody, who actually is involved in editing the itineraries, I see wineries featured pretty much in every single program.
Right. Well, also, we love people to just
Drink.
But I think a winery is a way to get to know Israel through taste. We almost always go to a winery that there's a story behind. This is people who are Israelis who took it upon themselves to connect to the land through that way and build this winery. It's not an easy economic choice to make. There's not a lot of profit in winemaking. And still people do it because it's an important part of who we are. And it's also sometimes also a political issue. We can talk about that there's slowly the Golan, the Galil, and then later on also in the Negev and the Ramat Negev, which you would be very, very surprised, are wineries starting to come up. And also on the other, in the south of Israel next to Mitzpe Ramon, but also on the other side of what we call the Green Line, or some people call the Green Line, a lot of prominent wineries, very good ones, started to happen. First, historically, we know that there were a lot of wineries in that region, but later on, it became a conscious thing of the people who live there wanting to normalize as much as possible life. And if we want to normalize life there, that means also having a winery. So there's several wineries there. Some people are very opposed to it. They call it like wine washing, basically. Come see our vineyard, but knowing that this is on a disputed territory.
Wine washing. Wow. I love that. As in it's a way of kind of deflecting away from the contentious aspects of the region through the wine. It's fascinating because you're talking about, as a child, your family, your parents are French.
One of them, yeah.
One of your father.
My father's
Your
French.
father is French, right? So you were raised here, but when we typically think about French culture, right, the snobbery around wine.
Yeah.
And you have that French influence as you were raised here. I can tell you, growing up in the north of England and being, from a Jewish family, how would wine play? We would have grape juice, typical mass-produced grape juice. I mean, I'm talking about my childhood, but even today, as a family, we cannot bring in Shabbat unless there is a bottle of Kedem grape juice on our table. There will be mutiny.
Oh my God.
The children will not agree to even sit at the Friday night table unless there's kedem. So I will actually have to, we live in Rehovot, and I will actually have to make a pilgrimage to Modi'in, where a lot of the American brands are in the stores, just to acquire this kedem grape juice. So it's like, we're talking about wineries and we're talking about this industry and culture of wine. And yet as Jews, very often we seem to kind of gravitate back towards a ritualistic perspective.
Right.
We have this kind of like sentimentality and nostalgia around like kedem wine and what that means for us at a table. And maybe we would pour the kedem grape juice, and today then we'd bring out,
the good wine.
The good wine.
The good
right,
stuff.
Exactly.
So it's interesting. We grew up in very different households, which is great. I grew up where wine was part of every meal, not only Shabbat. My grandparents drank a bottle of wine every day. They didn't keep kosher, so it wasn't so important to them. They used to live in Paris. And I really remember my aunt and uncles and my father's frustration of trying to find good wine in Israel for many, many years, up until the 90s. And we used to drink, a Cabernet, but it wasn't as good as what we're drinking today. And now I was introduced in a very early age to good wine. I'm also not fussy about it, which I tried to tell my kids. Like, there's a lot of, speaking about ritualistic, there's something very, very cultish sometimes about wine, or something very snobby.
Yes, it's like a status symbol.
It is a status symbol. I get very bored about talking about specific wines and what's the best. I feel like if you want it, drink it. If it's nice, enjoy it.
So that's more tapping into the experiential as opposed to like
exactly, or not thinking about the label so much, just enjoying the wine, because some of it is about what's considered good wine.
Right.
So I think there is a price point where, if it's underneath that price point, it's most likely not very good wine. But above that, different people have different tastes, and you can really like one wine and not like the other wine. It also depends on what you're eating it with, who you're drinking it with, all these other parameters. But having a good bottle of wine in order to celebrate something or to be part of the meal, I think is essential.
To elevate the experience. How many wineries? I mean, where are we up to now?
Okay,
it's 2025.
So we looked at the numbers again. Don't hold us accountable for everything, but there's about 300 wineries in Israel, which is,
it's skyrocketed if you think about
it's a very small country.
40 years?
30, 40 years. 40 years, I would say even. Some of them are commercial wineries and some of them are little boutique wineries. And when we say boutique, it could be like 15 bottles a year where someone has this passion and does this in their home garage. But some of them are bigger manufacturers who make wonderful wine. We were just, the J2 staff were just up north reconnecting to our winery friends and to people who live up north after October 7th to see how they're doing. We met a few people who are like really holding by their teeth, but still making wine.
Wow, that's pretty inspiring.
Very, very inspiring. But they know that this is part of who we are. If we want to continue growing and being who we are, this is part of what we are and what we do. We went to Enzivan, met people in Paltel who are doing great wines. So I think it's continuing. It's still there. People, even though they couldn't go into the wineries, some people still manufactured, and a lot of Israelis bought wines from the north and from the regions that were hit in order to support these people. So that's a beautiful sense of solidarity that also happened.
Yeah, I actually remember going shortly after October 7th. A friend of mine, her husband sells wine privately. And he had heard about a specific soldier who'd been injured seriously in Gaza, and he was in the rehabilitation unit in Tel HaShomer. There was one specific kind of wine that he liked. So my friend, talking pilgrimages, she asked if I would join her in going to Tel HaShomer to locate this soldier who she's never met before with this bottle of wine. But she's like, she knew the name, how old he was, in this wine. So we kind of trekked from room to room. But yeah, like
and
it's a source. And we found him.
Wow.
And we gave him the wine. And it was, after kind of a few moments of awkwardness, why these two strangers are turning up with a bottle of wine. But I feel like that's Israel, right? Like everybody has a story. And if we're connecting through wine or whatever it is, that's also a symbol of like resilience and just kind of comfort, returning to what's familiar. But I read something wacky that approximately 60,000 tons of wine grapes are produced in Israel per year.
Wow.
And 12 million bottles of grape juice.
Yeah.
That's pretty staggering.
Yeah.
And 40 million of wine.
That's amazing. Also, grape juice, is used when you do kiddush. So the kids usually drink grape juice, and also Pesach is a big the 4 cups. Not a lot of people can drink 4 cups of wine. I can tell you. Some of us do. I won't name names.
No wine shaming. And that's by each glass representing a different son.
Exactly. Right? A different son or a different force of redemption.
Right, exactly.
So grape juice is also a part of what we call in Hebrew tirosh, which is done from real grapes and almost no sugar added.
And what was interesting to me, and actually it's pretty close to home, is that there are institutions where there are winemaking studies.
Yes.
And one of them is very close to me, the Faculty of Agriculture in Rehovot.
So as we see more and more boutique wineries happen, and we need more and more people who are professional to actually make the wine. It used to be that we imported, like Rothschild, people from the outside to come and help us. But now most of the people who are winemakers or are the wine experts in each boutique winery are people who grew up here, most of them Israelis.
We're standing on our own 2 feet.
Exactly. More and more we see females joining the industry, which is also, it used to be a very, very masculine.
Dominated.
Exactly. Sommeliers, also people who know how to pair wine as we grow.
And
culturally,
we've got the cheese. Talking of pairing, we've got the cheese going for us in Israel as well.
We do. Speaking about my family, we used to bring from France, suitcases of wine and cheese, and now we no longer need to do that. Really, there's excellent cheeses.
Suitcases of wine and cheese?
We did. Kind of smelly.
So now you can bring in other things.
Yeah. I don't know. I feel like I need less and less stuff brought from the outside, which is amazing.
That's a good thing.
That's amazing. With the fact that all these cultures of people came into Israel, where a Brit from Northern England can meet French, Moroccan, Ashkenazi Jew together and talk about wine. This is, who we are, and we learn from each other. So that's one of the amazing things. I think wine is becoming more and more a part of who we are, and we encourage you when you come to Israel to visit wineries, but also when you walk around Tel Aviv, when you walk around Jerusalem, the new hip thing is wine bars. It's not so much about, also economically speaking, food is increasingly more expensive. So people, when they go out for a glass of wine and a little bit of dash on the side.
Can you recommend a wine bar, Rivka?
Actually, most of Nachalat Binyamin, like anyone that you will Hagefen, is
Nachalat
really cool.
Binyamin in Tel Aviv, the arts and crafts.
Yes, and when you walk there, you can have some, side dish and have a few glasses of wine poured by the cup.
Nice.
So we encourage you to try different terroirs of wineries in Israel and ask the people there to give you Israeli wines in order to complete your visit here.
And maybe even check out that wine poetry that you were referring to.
That is true.
Wine poetry paired with a good glass of wine.
Right. So as we're sitting here with a glass of Gewürztraminer wine, which is
my favorite. Thank you, Rivka, for bringing it in.
White wine. This specific bottle is made from the Judean desert. It's a new winery. So come join us. Have a glass of wine and listen to the rest of our podcasts also.
L'chaim.
And now, something for the road. A tip, a recommendation to help you make every journey your own.
Hi, I'm Mike, a tour educator and part of the J Square team. I made Aliyah from South Africa over half a century ago. Israel has seen many, many changes since then, but a popular one is the amazing transformation of its culinary world. Not that I had anything to do with it, of course, but I did milk cows on a kibbutz after my arrival. The evidence of that transformation is the great improvement in the quality and variety of bread, cheese, and wine. And fresh farm produce. It looks and is good, but presented simply. I remember the communal dining hall on the kibbutz. Members coming in for lunch from the fields and orchards would cut up their salad veggies with surgical precision. Lettuce, tomatoes, cucumbers, raw onions. Colorful, yes, but not likely to surprise your taste buds. It's a different world now. In many Israeli restaurants, salads have become an art form. Seriously. The excellent vegetables now share their bowl with generous servings of fruit, nuts, seeds, cheeses, and other delicacies. Artistically creative, mouth-watering, and often big enough to share. Bring on the delicious warm crusty bread. A far cry from the greyish standard loaves and white cotton wool textures of the 1970s. Friday was different, however. Half the Jewish world was out buying or baking chalot, the braided Shabbat bread. My local grocery, makolet in Hebrew, sold only a brick-shaped challah. But alongside the Hebrew Union College campus in Jerusalem, where the huge David Citadel Hotel stands today, was the tiny bakery of an elderly lady. Her braided sweet challah was legendary. A rabbinic student once told me that it didn't matter how far your apartment was from the campus. On Friday morning, when there were no classes, you rushed to the little bakery to buy 3 sweet chalot. 3? I asked. Of course, he said. 2 for kiddush and the 3rd for the way home. And the variety of cheese? Another marker of how far we have come. In those days, the makolet stopped at generic yellow cheese, spreadable white cheese, cottage cheese, and not much else. But a lot of time has passed, and I will happily complement my salad or my chunk of crusty bread with a ripe brie or a block of strong cheddar, or best of all, a well-matured goat cheese. But there is a third major indicator of how far we have come: Israeli wine. When the state was much younger, wine, at least for us poor students, came in 2 categories: barely drinkable and undrinkable. On the kibbutz, every Shabbat evening, bottles of sweet wine stood on the white tablecloths. We young men and women would knock back a couple of full cups, not for the taste, heaven forbid, but for the buzz. Today, Israel boasts over 300 wineries, about 35 serious commercial ones, a similar number of medium-sized establishments, and the rest small boutique installations, some excellent, some less so. In a tiny country the size of New Jersey, the variations in climate, terrain, and soil have produced 5 distinct wine regions. The elevation and wet winters of the Upper Galilee could not be more different than the arid wilderness of the Negev Desert, and each has specialized in proven great varieties for its region. Israeli wines may range from mediocre to very drinkable, and you can do well on a $10 budget, to utterly superb, with many international gold medals to their credit. Most of the big wineries, and many others, are designated as kosher, which is a question of supervision, not quality. Those that export kosher wine to the US, for example, are often frustrated to find that wine stores stock their product in the kosher section. Please, put my Cabernet Sauvignon where it belongs, they complain, with other good cabs. Mine has won awards. Progress has been made, I understand. Here's a wonderful wine anecdote. Many years ago, I guided a small group from Australia. Its most colorful member was an 86-year-old First World War veteran of the Australian Light Horse. He fought the Turks in Gaza, Beersheba, and Semach at the northern tip of the Jordan Valley. On the road to Tel Aviv, he noticed the sign for Rishon LeZion and got all excited. "I was there in 1917, he yelled in his strong outback Australian accent. Rishon LeZion, founded in 1882, was renowned for its modern winery. The Turks had already fled, and the soldiers from down under were greeted with great warmth by the Jewish residents. The Aussies were dying for some beer, but they figured that wine was the next best thing. They were guests of the winery, but one soldier failed to secure the tap of a huge vat. All night long, the wine flowed out, down a ramp and into the street. It rained that night. In the morning, the liberators of Rishon LeZion filled their canteens from the puddles in the street. They could not believe the wonderful flavor of the rainwater in this part of the world. But their joy was short-lived. The winery fined them £50 sterling, a lot of money in those days, to recompense them for the wine. So Please raise your glasses to your next trip. L'chaim.
Thanks for listening. Dive deeper into the world of travel on our J Squared Adventures website. That's j2adventures.com. And stay in the loop with our latest adventures on all our social media platforms, Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn, all under J2 Adventures. And if you enjoyed hanging out with us, don't forget to leave us a comment, review, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Until next time, travel safely and keep wondering. I'm Sorrel.
I'm Scott.
See you soon with the Wandering Jews.